In this real quick example, I want to show you some JavaScript samples. Now, the first thing I know about JavaScript is it needs to go inside of your HTML page. There's two ways of doing this. Now, both of these involve using a script tag. In the first case, we can reference an external file. And what we do is you specify the source, src equals a file name .js. Now, we do have to include a closing script tag, otherwise this will not work. This is a very key thing that we need to remember. Now, you might be asking, why do you have to include a closing script tag? Well, that's because the other way is to not use the external That's because the other way is to not include using the external source and instead put your JavaScript between the two tags. Now, JavaScript is going to run looking at the first line of code and go on to the second, the third, the fourth, etc. until it reaches the end by default. Now, we can make changes to that, and we'll show that a little bit later, but for right now, we're just going to be looking at a very linear progression. And we just want to say hello in a little pop-up box. If I refresh my screen, you'll notice you get a little hello message. You click OK, and the message goes away. It's a very simple way to create a simple message. It could be for a warning or an error. It could just be a pop-up to say hi. We don't want to use it too much because it can become very distracting and frustrating to the user. But for testing and demonstration purposes, it works just fine. In this simple little example, though, you can see a lot of different things. First off, you have alert, and that's a command inside of JavaScript to create that pop-up window. You can see inside of some double quotes, we have a message, hello. And that message is what we call a string. It's a string because it's inside of those quotes, and that's what gets displayed. JavaScript is actually pretty flexible, and I can also use single quotes if I prefer. Go in my browser, reload, and you can see it works the exact same way. But one key thing to keep in mind is you cannot mix them, where you have a single quote to open it and a double quote to close it, or vice versa. If we do this, you'll notice that nothing happens, and that's because we've generated a JavaScript error that it doesn't know how to proceed from. You'll also notice that I put a semicolon at the end of the line. Now, the end of the line, semicolon, is just to let me know that I've completed this line of code and I'm ready for my next line. The semicolon is optional if I move each line of code to a subsequent and following line. However, it is considered best practice to include the semicolon. Some other things that we might want to include is the concept of a comment. Now, there's lots of reasons to use a comment. I just want to show you how to. JavaScript has two different types of comments. First is 2 forward slashes. Now, comments are ignored when we're going through the processing of JavaScript. And if I put a double slash, I can say alert. And hi, if I save and reload, you see our initial hello, and that works just as it did before. But the hi was bypassed. And that is simply because you have a double slash before it, canceling out that line of code. We also have a multi-line comment. A multi-line comment is a slash star and then the comment text. What's nice about a multi-line comment is it can go over multiple lines. It can also be just within a partial line. Now let's move on and look at something a little bit different, and that is going to be our variables. Now, JavaScript internally does what we call typing, and that means it figures out what type of variable we're going to have. This dramatically simplifies it, especially if you're a beginning programmer, which makes it a lot easier. What you basically need to know is that JavaScript keeps things as strings, which is pure text, and whatever's inside the quotes is going to be what's going to be displayed, and numbers. And it also includes some little bit more complicated data types called objects that we'll look at later. So let's take a quick look at how we declare a variable. We can say var first name equals Bob. This is a string because it's inside of our quotes, which we already know. And what a variable does, it allows us to store a value for a little bit of time so we can use it later on, such as alert first name. Now, because we did not put first name inside of quotes, it's being used as a variable. And we have Bob show up in our alert box. That's because when the variable is called, it's not displaying first name, it's displaying the contents of first name. First name is just a name that we've given it so we can use it ourselves. There's a couple things to keep in mind when naming your variables. JavaScript is going to prefer mostly letters and numbers and some underscores. Underscores are pretty uncommon in JavaScript, but they can be found. There are a couple of other small exceptions, but you don't need to worry about those at this time. Let's look at some other variables that we could use. I could say var age and give a number 35. The number, because it is purely numeric, will allow it to be stored without using the quotes. If I have a string, because it's just the literal interpretation of those characters, it can't do any math on it. However, with age, I can do some math with it. For example, we could try to figure out the difference in time until someone reaches 40 if their age is 35. So I can say alert 40 minus age, and when I save and run it, it gives me an answer of 5. So I can mix a literal value where I put in the exact number with a variable if I want. And that was a simple example of using a minus sign. Other things we can do is we could store a value of some math into another variable. So in this case, we have a variable called square feet, and it's going to be equal to 10 times 12. We could put the direct value into an alert box if we wanted. And of course, we also have division. Now, you might have noticed that the multiplication uses a star symbol, which is shift 8, also sometimes referred to as the asterisk. The division uses the forward slash. Now I'm going to just comment out our first alert, refresh, and we have 12 as our answer, which is fitting because our alert is 7 plus 5. Those are just some quick examples of using JavaScript inside your web page. You'll find more examples in part 2 of an introduction to JavaScript.